Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the afternoon session of the National陽明交通University's Anthropocene and Cold War mini symposium. The afternoon session is titled Life and Material in the Cold War East Asia. My name is Juyoung Lee, PhD candidate at Johns Hopkins University's Department of History of Science and Technology, working on the network of private consultants behind fertilizer plants in Taiwan and South Korea. So in our morning session, Professor Park commented that results and causes of Anthropocene effects depends on different settings. So in this afternoon, we're kind of taking the notion of Anthropocene and taking it within the particular context of Cold War. Cold War has been discussed by scholars of STS because of its complicated political setting. Exposes the moments of entanglement between science, technology, medicine, and human. So today's speakers for the afternoon session will enhance this entanglement by discussing material culture behind human, examining the entanglement of human, animal, fish, plant, and other non-human materials within Cold War's political, social, and cultural setting. Each speaker will have about 20 minutes for their presentation, which will be followed by Q&As. Our first speaker is Professor Jaehwan, Assistant Professor of Science and Technology Studies at Pusan National University's Institute of General Education. Earning his PhD in History of Science and Technology from Seoul National University, he works on the Cold War history of human biology and environmental sciences. Our second speaker is 𝗔𝘀𝗶 Associate Professor of National Chengchi University's Department of Sociology. He received his PhD from Duke University's Department of Sociology, and his research interest includes population and health, shipbuilding industry. Finally, we have Professor Cheng-Chi, Associate Professor of National Zhongxing University's Department of Chinese Literature. He holds PhD degree in anthropology from University of Hawaii and Manoa. His previous research focuses on tourism in East Asia. So this was my introduction to all the three speakers for the afternoon session, and without further ado, I will hand it over the stage to Dr. Hyun. Please welcome him with a big hand.
So, thank you. Thank you, Juyoung, for the nice introduction, and I also thank 𝗟𝗏𝗲 for this opportunity to introduce my work to the Taiwanese colleagues. And the current work, the translation origins of migratory animal pathological survey, is preliminary, so I'm really looking forward to listening to your feedback and comment after my talk. Okay. Because right now I have many things in my hands. So.
You just tell me.
Okay. So let me introduce my research subject. So I'm looking at the American military-initiated international project called Migratory Animal Pathological Survey, or MAPS. This project is well known as an international bird banding project. That is, to put rings on birds' legs to identify and keep track of individual birds. But this 8-year project was devised for several purposes. First, to determine the origins and movement of migratory bird populations in East Asia. Second, to make a study of avian ectoparasites to serve as background information for epidemiological studies in Asian laboratories of the zoonosis. Third, to make a survey of the hematozoa in birds. And finally, to accurate general information concerning the ecology of Asian birds. Military entomology was backgrounded on the project purposes, and it's not surprising given that it was initiated by the US Army entomologists And the support came from the US Army Research and Development Group Far East and Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. If we turn our attention to the scope of cooperation, it's a very trans-Asian. It included field workers and scientists based in South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Borneo, Indonesia, Singapore, and India, which were located below the bamboo curtain. The most active participants were from South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Thailand, and Malaysia, where the presence of the US military was prevalent. Practitioners were also military scientists working in the US-based laboratories. For instance, Masayoshi Yoshi, a Japanese collaborator, worked at the 406 Medical General Laboratory, Tokyo, in Japan. So if we define the nature of the project, it was a trans-Asian Cold War project of the US military. It sounds awkward, but today, I would like to talk about the trans-Asian origins of this trans-Asian Cold War project by focusing on the interactions between Asian actors. So, who was the principal investigator of this project? It was Elliot McClure, born in Chicago and an entomologist turned birdman. He was trained in entomology, but started his career as an ornithologist at the 406 Medical General Laboratory, Tokyo, from 1950 to 1958. Later, he moved to the US Army Medical Research Unit in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, but soon came back to Tokyo as a PI for MAPS in 1963. So for the first 3 years, the MAPS headquarters were located in Tokyo. But in 1966, it was newly settled at the US component, Seattle Medical Research Laboratory, Thailand. So what were the MAPS activities? In the early years, after the settlement of participants, the headquarters trained them in bird banding and cellological and entomological techniques, and supplied materials like bird wings and immunochemical materials. For the training and sharing of the research, the headquarters annually held MAPS conferences or workshops. These events were often held together with the meeting of the International Council for Bird Preservation. After the completion of training, regional participants carried out fieldwork in their own countries. What the field workers did were bird banding and cellological and entomological surveys. The result was that they banded 1,165,288 birds of 1,216 species in total. So here is the process of the MAPS activities. While stationing in the field workers banded birds, filmed their blood, and extracted ectoparasites. After that, they reported the place and species information of the banded birds to the headquarters and sent blood and ectoparasite specimens to cooperative US military laboratories. For instance, Japanese bird banders sent their blood samples to the 406 Medical General Laboratory, Tokyo, while Malaysian participants did cellological analysis by themselves at the US Army Research Unit, Kuala Lumpur. Meanwhile, the public or lay people who found the banded birds sent a letter containing the information about the place of their encounter to the mailing address written in the bird wing, and it was the Hong Kong Reference Center. All the information was later sent to headquarters, and the headquarters made annual reports based on the collection. I believe that the project itself is explained in detail, and I wanted to focus on my main interest now. And it's a photograph of participants in the MAPS Joint Conference with the International Council for Bird Preservation. And here, I'm interested in the figure of number 2 in this picture. He is the South Korean team leader, 𝗘𝗀𝗷𝗲𝗰. So I will call him Dr. Wang from now. So he was a young, unprivileged South Korean biologist who had graduated from the newly established second-tier Korean university, 𝗘হি University, and just obtained a PhD from Hokkaido University in Japan in 1960. He had the chance to work as a postdoc at the Yale Peabody Museum under the guidance of 𝗘𝗀𝗷𝗲𝗰𝗴𝗋 in 1960 and 1961. Nevertheless, he recollected that the biggest turning point in his career and the history of Korean ornithology, as well as bird conservation in his country, was his participation in the MAPS project. I would like to turn to his essay, The History of Ornithology in South Korea, written in Korean. In the paper, his recollection of the MAPS project is a bit different from the explanation I offered previously. He says, from July 1963 to June 1969, with the support of the US government, I carried out research on the migratory routes of birds. Here the MAPS is described as a bird banding project. That's true, but he doesn't mention any pathological aspects. In fact, a core aim of the MAPS project, and even the changes the project name. In fact, once group was unable to carry out any research related to pathological part of MAPS. At 𝗘হি University, those studies were only enabled after 1970, 1 year before the project ended, and when the Department of Parasitology was established. Before that, he didn't develop any collaborative relationship with the US military entomologist 𝗟𝗏𝗏𝗏, who had been dispatched to Korea by the Smithsonian Institution and closely worked with the scientists at the 406 General Medical Lab Tokyo. That is related to his lab didn't have any material infrastructure to conduct any pathological research. So in fact, his group only carried out the bird banding part while dismissing the pathological part. If you read McClure's evaluation report of one's qualifications, you should be curious about why McClure chose one as his Korean partner. He says, one is a very aggressive person resulting from economic and academic starvation, jealous of other university professors who are more affluent. 𝗘হি is a new university built on a lavish scale with a complete lack of reality. No maintenance, incomplete buildings, no furnishings, no heat, no laboratory equipment, even no office equipment. One has office on the 7th floor with no elevator, no heat, only a desk and chair. We will need everything: field, office, and supportive equipment. My impression is that he will work on this project. Most of the funds will go for salaries, and the result we get may not be great. So I wanted to ask here, despite his one's team's incapability of pathological research and McClure's very low opinion of one's qualifications, why was one included in MAPS? To understand his inclusion, we have to look at the Japanese group's role in the formation of MAPS and the early activities. Recently, Japanese historian Annika Culver beautifully shows that Japanese ornithologists like Nahisa Kuroda and Yoshimaru Yamashina carried out inter-Asian surveys during the Japanese Empire and called the activities an attempt to build an avian empire. In the post-war years, those imperial ornithologists collaborated with the US military scientists in southern Japanese birds in the Japanese archipelago. I would like to locate the MAPS project within the context of Japanese ornithologists' revitalization of the Trans-Asian bird surveys in the early 1960s. Indeed, in 1960, a new opportunity came to Japanese ornithologists. It was when the Japanese yen became finally normalized in its exchange value, so could afford to do overseas activities, and when the Japanese government began to support and encourage overseas fieldwork activities. Furthermore, Yoshimaru Yamashina, a relative of the Japanese Emperor Hirohito, could exert some power to gain some governmental support in their international universities. Using the new money and power, Kuroda and Yamashina ambitioned to host international world conferences and make the Yamashina Institute a center for Asian ornithology and promote a Trans-Asian bird banding project. In this context, the Yamashina Institute hosted the International Council for Bird Preservation, or ICBP, meeting in Tokyo, and it was held in Asia for the first time. Yamashina ornithologists also established the Asian section within the ICBP. Yamashina became president, and 𝗂𝗂𝗷𝗲 became vice president. National members of the Asian section were selected by relying on the Japanese ornithologists' colonial ties. 𝗘𝗀𝗷𝗶 was chosen as secretary of the Korean sector since he was the son of Hong-gu-won and younger brother 𝗘𝗀𝗷𝗶, Japanese ornithologists' long-term colonial collaborators. After the establishment of the Asian section, the Yamashina Institute gained funding from the Japanese Forestry Agency to carry out a Trans-Asian bird banding project, but because of some political reasons, it soon ceased in 1963. It was the very time when Colonel Barnes of the Walter Reed Army Institute approached Kuroda at the Yamashina Institute to get some advice concerning the movement of wild birds suspected of transmitting Japanese encephalitis viruses. They persuaded the colonel to initiate the MAPS project for pathological research purposes and recommended McClure as a PI. And due to this background role in initiating MAPS, the Japanese could influence the early setting of the project. Now we can understand what's inclusion in MAPS. He came to be involved in the project by the help of Japanese ornithologists. Indeed, for one, MAPS was a bird banding project initiated by the Japanese ornithologists at the ICBP Asian section. So one's team considered Kuroda and his colleagues at the Yamashina Institute as the main audience of their work and focused on the bird migration between Japanese archipelago and the Korean peninsula. The pathology part, the US PI's interest, was totally ignored in general, at least in the early years. It is also interesting that one's team used the supplies that came from the Yamashina Institute, not from MAPS headquarters, for the first few years. And it means that all the letters from the public who discovered the birds, the data would be gained by the Yamashina Institute, not by McClure, the US military scientist. Indeed, the Yamashina Institute was a place where one himself and his students were retrained in bird banding and ornithology. And I need to study further, but I speculate that McClure's movement of headquarters from Tokyo to Bangkok might be related to such powerful presence of the Japanese team in the early period of MAPS. I would like to get back to my definition, or early definition of MAPS. I said that it was a Trans-Asian Cold War project of the US military. It's still true, but if we consider the early history of MAPS and the role of Japanese ornithologists at the Yamashina Institute, we should consider it as our Trans-Asian Polar Project that had been built on the revitalization of Japanese avian empire's network and desire in the early 1960s. South Korean biologist Won could be part of the Polar Project, not because of the polar importance of South Korea for US military scientists, but because of his ties with Japanese former avian imperialists. I hope that my crude observation helped today's discussion on life and material in Korea, East Asia. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. It was a very interesting talk that not only talks about like US, East Asia, but also like trans-Asian connections and also about birds as well. I think we'll have more chance to discuss later in the Q&A section. And I'll introduce our next speaker, 𝗘হি𝘁𝗴𝗶, professor from National Jeongju University, and today he will talk about his new research on fishery and aquaculture.
Okay, so I just first give you a picture. Here is the typical landscape of if you find most, I can believe most southwestern coastal village. And what do you find? And where's the village? And that's not a farm, that's all fish farm. So it's like in the ocean. If you look at that, that's the. I just simply find some typical on the web. Like if you visit anyone, probably anyone, it looks like this nowadays. So it's a typical landscape, and many townships you probably have half of this half village. It look like this. So that because that's a very town has a. Now it's declining, but it had a huge aquatic sector, especially here. So I want to talk about how it began and how it kind of evolved, actually gradually kind of deviate from the original path. So first is the agricultural development. I just have a showing introduction here. That's the in 1950 and probably in 1960, probably until 1970, US and some Japanese development agencies actually provide resource, train local expert, and shape policy network. And what's there? This is often forgotten history because in Taiwan we often talk about the process of industrialization. But actually, before the industrialization, there is a certain period. Agricultural export is the main source of foreign reserve. I think probably before 1960. I have the number, but I don't remember the detail. Of course, most are sugar or rice, but also you can see this kind of structure. That is, those research institute or development agency, they try to promote more some more commercialized agriculture and more high value like this. And there's government, and they have several they have facilitated export and sponsor some R&D. Also heavily promoted the modern agriculture. And the interesting fact is that if we look at the two things above, we often have a sense that probably we'll go to some large corporation, but that's not because the land reform and the later continuous protection for the small farmer. Most of these agricultural projects actually finally done by those small farmers. So I want to tell the story today is aquatic development that is very interesting. We now see the most advanced country in the aquatic industry is Norway, and which dominated by 3 or 4 big firms. If you look at the Southeast Asia, you look Thailand also have some very large firms. But in Taiwan, there's almost no such case. They're all well, not say small, but actually I will talk about the structure because the structure actually persists until today. So it's very similar. There are some institutes like R&D and technology transfer, and government encourage export, especially to Japan. And throughout the 1950 to 60, Japan is the main destiny for the Taiwanese agricultural product. And local farms create a structured vertical specialization, localized technology. And I will explain a little bit more later. So I will talk about the beginning because the agriculture actually can trace back 200 or 300 years ago, like Qing Dynasty. We now have some historical evidence, or even much longer, like the Dutch period, you have some historical record. But the key point, I will give, let's give here. So for example, like here, I just first showed the shrimp production to explain what's changed here. Is that in the history, most to the final part, and the local language called the big shrimp, is that you catch the fry from the ocean, and you try to feed it in your pond, and then you come down to you sell it or eat. So that's the typical structure, is that you only for here, but the problem is in this part, that's kind of not, before 1968, we don't, sorry. So, before 1968, we don't have this part. You cannot reproduce this part in your laboratory or any place. So you have to catch it from the ocean. So they don't, this part is you have a much longer history. But for this part, this much later, not until the 1960s from the project. And this is from the first one who did this. It's called Li-Hsuan, and he graduated from National Taiwan University, and then went to the Tokyo University, got his PhD. And this project is sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation, and I will say that I think many people here probably know that there's a certain type they call protein anxiety. I use the term, yeah, because they try to increase the production of any kind of protein. So in Taiwan, they kind of sponsor the aquaculture, they sponsor the pig farm, they sponsor the distant fishery. Anything can increase the production of the protein. And in some ways, it's very successful, because in Taiwan, not until probably 2000, all these sectors are very large, and very large, even around the world. Like a pig farm, Taiwan was the #2 exporter before 1997, and the distant fishery is nowadays still a big player. And also the agriculture, Taiwan has exported more, have a #1 in shrimp export in 1988. So that's the story. So Li-Hsuan, also the Rockefeller Foundation, they kind of sponsor. They build a team, and they get money, but most of the training are done in Japan. I'm not the expert for for the STA, so I don't really trace back where they are trained. But I noticed that most all the technicians they are trained. First of all, they probably many of them grow up in the Japanese period, so many of them can speak or read Japanese. And the second is that those research institutes, they constantly send people to Japan to learn. But in 1968, Li-Hsuan, he was then the fishery, the director of the Tongan branch. It's very relatively small one. The name of this institute actually changed several times. I didn't show it, but that's the institute is still there, and that's the Fishery Research Institute, the branch there. He was the director, and he made breakthrough. And I should explain is that he made this part possible. By man-made, you can do this, and which means now your fry were not constrained by the nature. In the past, you can only have so many shrimp. It depends on how many fry you can catch in the ocean. Still nowadays, eels is still the case. So many people try to catch that. But most of fishes we don't do that. We don't do that anymore. So when I did this research, because my father grew up in a fishery village, so I asked him. He said yes, because when he was children, that one of their kind of income is to try to catch this fry, not only shrimp, but many other fish, and to sell them to the aquaculture, to the fish farm. So that's the typical part. So you now have kind of broke the constraint of this part. This part originally kind of restrained by the nature. So that's what Dr. Liao did, and this is what when I visited him 2 years ago. So the breakthrough technology came from Japan, and also because the production become after 1997, the growth exponentially, and so you can trace back to this breakthrough and create a boom Taiwanese aquatic industry. That's why the landscape began to what I just showed you, because every coastal, every maybe a little bit exaggerated, but kind of many coastal village and many farmers, they just dig their farm to shift them become a fish farm. And now kind of government have more control, but during certain time, that's kind of out of control, and so that should change the whole landscape in the coastal. And so the Jaehwan, so if you look at any official record, that is, you will say he's kind of the father of the shrimp, like that, because this breakthrough, they have a kind of great importance. But I want to talk about what happened later in the local social network or local structure. Is that first the statistical giant tiger problem in 1986, so change the structure. So in 1988, so export more than 8 million tons of the shrimp, and many people still, I think the kind of government propaganda, but that time, many even older people, they remember this. When I do the whole field work, and many older generation, they still remember the glory time, like we are the empire. Now, of course, that's not anymore, but that's because in 1988 we have so many. But the problem is, so how the production system shift? Because when I did the field work, I asked those fish farmers, and they actually didn't say many good things about Dr. Liao. And not because he's bad, he just think that they don't really have that kind of relationship. And that's fair or unfair, that's another issue, because I kind of asked Dr. Liao in a very direct way, and he has an interesting answer. He said, like, when they make money, they didn't give me the profit, so how can they blame me to not really make a convenient way to do that, so things like that. But the key issue is here, the production system is dominated by small family farm. So that's very important. And remember that most of these farmers, they are probably literate, but many of them don't have any high formal education. Many of them have elementary school, middle school, but also some of them have very high education, but that's a small portion. So the way they did it is that they kind of, when those systems build up, they kind of develop many tacit knowledge on how to the shrimp or other fish, a mixture of formal knowledge and experience. So how did they do that? For example, I give you an example of what's the many older generation. So an important issue here is that you must know exactly what's the water and what's the bait of those small, the fry or the small fry. So for example, like the water, and the way they understand the water by those farmers is that if you are the formal trained scientist, you probably want to measure a lot of things. You want to know the salt, you want to measure the acid, but they kind of learn a way to look at the color of the water. That's how they did it. And they even test that. For many younger generations, they didn't do that, and they say that's kind of healthy or like that. But older generation, they kind of test because they have a certain way to kind of make those knowledge kind of a tacit knowledge, even by their body, can be sensed by their body, things like that. And they also divide this is also small. So I did become the 5 stage, and that's become the system of the Taiwanese agriculture. Is that every stage has many different farmers. So people constantly make transactions between those stages. And they are very small. So I kind of, when I did the field work, I kind of follow the transaction, and they say, okay, they got the bag, so that's the 2000s. They go Angina, the ray one, and very small. So say, how do you find the 2000? He asked me, can you find that? Okay, so they have some way to calculate that, and like there's a board, it's board probably 10,000 or things like that, because they're very small. And so if you are so many people specialize in in kind of nurture the shrimp, and they have eggs, and so to these farmers, they kind of make the egg become the fry in about 2 weeks or something like that, and they sold to the 3rd stage, and people get over 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so, and the final oka, the black shell stage. And the final one, they generally call like a big one, like they will say that's the big fish or big shrimp. And you can find almost every type of fish was kind of I would say producing this fashion. And like grouper or maybe even higher value nowadays, not many people kind of still have the shrimp, but make shrimp produce shrimp, but many people produce like grouper or other more high value. But the structure is the same. So those small farmers, they have. So you really look back to this this landscape. It's not only show you there are many water, but you can notice that there are many small ponds, and probably each small pond owned by different farmers. So they kind of did different stage, a very limited stage, and they can handle the knowledge because like. They probably have some understanding like in this stage, what kind of thing you need to feed the shrimp, what kind of, the water is most important, is the salt or the acid or something. Because in different stages, they have different focus. So that's the way how we'll say the core, the kind of some of the big company, I think it's a big breakthrough, even though some kind of funded by the US agency and training the Japanese expert, which also, like the previous study shows by is that kind of also can trace back to the colonial period, because not this kind of breakthrough, but another breakthrough is actually made in 1930. So that's why there are many technicians, they continues to go to, at that time, visit Japan. And I even know magazine, even you can make a fortune by publishing a magazine translating the Japanese article and sold to the Taiwan farmer. And so that's the kind of the boom of that time. So that's core, but later then he become much more like a local social network. So they kind of tossing knowledge, and they kind of shift those production system and the practice, which originally is you can see like for the paper is the very exact description of the chemical element of the water or soil, which kind of environment is best for the which stage, but they later change it. They change this to a tasking knowledge. So that's small farm, and they never, until now, still never shift to a corporate system. Even I heard, when I did field work, I heard that rumor that some big company try to invest, but they kind of fail. But that's all another story. But they still kind of this kind of system, small farm. Each one did a small part, even though some of them are actually heavy investment. Okay, so that's the systematic outcome. Is that in Taiwan agriculture we have very strong embracing productivity, but very poor environmental management. So you can see that's another. Okay. So that's the outcome of that. So of course they have some risk, and because they don't have a good environmental management system, they have constant problem of fish disease. And the way they deal with that is that they probably put some drugs. So I think there's a big, interesting STS issue is that how they use drug and how this drug was tested. But I'm not expert in this respect. But that's always a big issue in the aquatic industry, because that's especially when you want to export, or that recent trouble with China They claim that the Taiwan, the fish Taiwan export have some drugs, still have some illegal drugs in within the fish body. So mostly from virus and the bacteria. So how do they deal with that? They deal with that by introducing new species. And that's another story. I think that's kind of unintended outcome of the original system. But because Taiwan is a subtropical, so kind of easier to find some species. And but any new species, the local farmers, they try to break down to this system. So like grouper actually is from South China Seas, like area, Southeast China, and many different fish, some from almost everywhere. It's kind of they kind of introduce a new species using drug, and sometimes became problem, especially drugs. But new species, so in Taiwan the agricultural system is have many types of. They can produce about 70 types, 70 species of fish. That's really large. You consider the size of the country. And the gradual disentanglement between industry and research institute. So nowadays, if you ask anyone in the industry, they would say they have no relationship. And you go to the research institute, they try to kind of make they still have some relationship, but kind of not as strong as the like 1960 kind of government introduced technology, not anymore. So they have their own local logic, local structure. In research institute, they often criticize for they have become another research institute, like college also. Their promotion is depending on the paper they publish, not the also. So that's my short story, and I hope it's kind of related to the issue is the core and how these things become change or evolve by the local production structure, and eventually change the whole landscape and many other outcomes. So thanks for your patience.
Thank you very much. I learned so much about the agricultural structure and also the practice of shrimp farming in Taiwan. And the shrimp production having that has like certain stages following the changes of shrimp was like such an interesting story, and definitely shows the type relationship between human and non-human. And finally, we have Professor Chen Jianmin from National Zhongxing University, and his talk today is on food culture and materiality, connecting the stories of red coral necklace and soy sauce.
Thanks everyone for still being here. And after two insightful presentations given by Professor Hyun and Professor Cheng, now it is my turn to offer some recreation and food. By recreation and food, I mean red coral necklace and soy sauce, the two objects drawn from my previous research. So, the two objects are not relevant to each other, but it seems to me that they share something in common. They are both shaped by Cold War. And especially the one on the right, the soy sauce. I think it's quite familiar with us. To us, it's quite familiar, especially in East Asia, right? There are two cases I would like to use today to better make sense of Cold War and its life. Before we move to my introduction of the two objects, I would like to talk a little bit about my take on Cold War briefly. I think, as many scholars argue, Cold War remains existed in our daily life, or we may say Cold War still exists in our brain, our body, and our mind, and it's never gone too far. Particularly for people like me, who were born in the second half of the 1970s, Cold War is the essential part of life memories. Some part is vivid and yet some remains ambiguous. That is, on the one hand, we live in Cold War eras, living with various propagandas and receiving KMT's 𝗘旀𝗷𝗲's patriotic education in our childhood. On the other hand, we also encounter numerous conflicting moments to witness Taiwan in a transforming process. I would not claim Cold War quite nature to us, but it indeed constitutes part of us. My generation in particular, generation to generation, life of Cold War and its memory could be quite different, and many of us have part of it within us. Therefore, there is something I'd like to mention in advance. Unlike people surviving from the World War II or people of baby boomer, we have been told a lot and heard a lot about life before and after the war was like. In so doing, we had been installed lots of second-hand experience. It's unique and it may go further to shape, if not to determine, how we sense Cold War. Therefore, it is thus meaningful for us not to ignore its complexity. Okay, and then let's move to the next. Thank you. Let's take a quick look at the photo I put on my slide. These 4 huge photos have been exhibited in Taiwan's shopping station to welcome the tourists since Japanese tourists visiting Taiwan in the 1990s. They have different versions and many be interpreted slightly different. Many of you may have found the red jewel necklace are quite eye-catching and might be interested in why the 4 were put together. You may also wonder why that the photo of Queen Elizabeth presents and how this may work. She seems simply not fit in any already known historical narrative of Taiwan to the rest. I think you are correct. In my field work as a licensed tour guide, I was told to ignore the picture of Queen. Otherwise, you won't be able to handle the story. Okay, so let's go back to the red coral. Yeah, after this morning's session, I feel regret I should get more prepared to talk about non-human actor, especially the coral boat or the fishing way, how they acquire. Basically, in Taiwan, they use hammer, like in underwater to kind of crush the red coral, and so they won't get like huge red coral tree. So it get like priceless. So, but I will do that for my. I will bring the issue back, and that's my second home, kind of like second homework for later. Okay, so just more. Okay, although I think it could contribute to the field of. Let's go back to the red coral in today's presentation, or I think it could contribute to the field of environmental history. I wouldn't touch upon the topic of coral picking or coral boats in East Asia. There's more research need to be done for now. This object in Taiwan tells a story of that coral jewel that connects China's past, present, and the future to Taiwan. This object has been connected to 𝗘旀𝗷𝗲𝗰, Chinese 曹珠or 东珠, worn by the Chinese emperor and the royal family members. Court beads are introduced by the Tibetan Buddhist monk and have become the symbol of the Cheng emperors. The shopping station and the Taiwanese tour guide clearly sees the difference between court beads and the red coral. However, they choose to take advantage of court beads to claim red coral necklace similarity and its importance as Taiwan's tribute to the Cheng central government. In such a narrative, they have created connection between contemporary Taiwan and China's remote past for the PRC tourists, again to reclaim Taiwan's Chineseness narrated by this object, this tourism souvenir. Moreover, a half-fabricated and half-true story has been told around the nationalist and the Taiwan in the Cold War period. The life story of Maiden 𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗃 𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗃 generates more invest attention from tourists. The anecdote of China's First Lady concerns not only her actions in the anti-Japanese war, but largely her charismatic personality and the tales of her personal life. The tourists are wondering how her life spent in Taiwan is like. Maiden 𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗃 is extremely popular, partially because of the constructed historical familiarity associated with 𝗘旀𝗷𝗲, which interested the tourists, and partially because of their powerful desire to see how the Juyoung family has made Taiwan differ differ from Chinese mainland. Interest in the life story of Zhang family reached its peak with the emergence of nationalist fever, 民国热, the Chinese term, accompanying Chinese attempt to revise modern history. In this history and in the mass media, Jiang Song is portrayed as living a legendary life of mystery and wealth, leading to a widespread interest in the secrets of the Zhang family. The example of Jiang Song demonstrates how the exactness that attracts Chinese tourists originate in their historical understanding of Taiwan, in which Chiang Kai-shek's family holds a crucial position. There's nothing new to everyone here, but I'd like to let all of you to two different historical narratives of Jiang Song and of the Juyoung, which are designed to pander to the Japanese tourist and the PRC tourist. The two different historical narratives come together in Cold War Taiwan. To the Japanese tourists, they have been attracted by Jiang Song, for they no longer feel uncomfortable to return to Japan's World War II memory. In post-war eras, they have chosen the US camp and then neutralized their memory of Japan's colonization. They came to Taiwan to search for Japan's remote and recent past. Instead of Chiang Kai-shek and his follower, the soft impression brought by Jiang Song helped not only to encourage their consumption, but their tourism practice in Cold War Taiwan and later on. Interestingly, both the Japanese and the PRC tourists, the Cold War experience from the different camp has led them to interact and to participate in person into contemporary history and somehow become the key to stimulate their desire to purchase such jewel. So we're going to move to the next. Okay. So now we are moving to the second object. I'd like to talk here. Taiwan's soy sauce. I don't know how many of you noticed that Taiwan has two different kinds of soy sauce. The first one is Yuyoung, it's black bean soy sauce. And the other one is soybean soy sauce, 豆瓣酱油 or 酱油, or simply soy sauce. It's confusing. I mean, to Taiwanese, many of us think we are testing Yuyoung, but according to my statistics or my survey, more than 80% market share is secured by the gigantic food company, and they are brewing soybean soy sauce. So that's somehow like there's some difference kind of existing right now. This is an intriguing case because the decades over Taiwan soy sauce have brought Taiwan, Japan, China, as well as the US together in Taiwan, as they have played different roles to change Taiwan's dining table subtly. The soy sauce production and its consumption has been strongly associated with the Japanese brewing equipment and the US American raw material, namely wheat and soybeans. In the following, I will try to delineate how the Taiwanese flavor has been transformed from black bean soy sauce to soybean soy sauce. Sorry for it. And in this transformation, the modern brewing technology provided by the Japanese and the raw materials sold and promoted by American Soybean Association, 𝗘𝗂𝗷𝗲𝗰 have helped this changing flavor of the Taiwanese. What has not been fully discussed is the Cold War region and what was brought to our daily life in the Cold War period. The two questions should be asked. When did the Taiwanese change their preference, and the reason why the Taiwanese had to change at the time? Even in the early 1980s, we still see the local black bean soy sauce brewer ceased. The major market share, only 30% of soybean soy sauce produced by the food industry offered to the market. The rapid urbanization and the consumer's strong desire, of course, to use the safer and clean products led this transformation. Nowadays, a clear line between black bean soy sauce Yuyoung and soybean soy sauce 豆瓣酱油、大豆酱油 has been drawn through both soy sauce product promotion, and popular writing on Taiwan's soy sauce. Yin-Yo is made of black beans and exposed to sun for at least 6 months. 大豆酱油 or soy sauce is usually made of soybean and wheat, and it requires 3 to 90 days of fermentation. That depends on different production procedures. So on the right is a traditional Yin-Yo brewing. They put the black beans in herbs and put salt, so without adding any waters. The next is the Japanese imported equipment to brew soybean soy sauce. So that's the difference. So we can see that one is being regarded as the traditional one, and the other is the modern one. So for the one on the next, so you can see that the U.S. soybean, the American Soybean Association tried to help hiding behind, try to promote its soybean, its overseas soybean export. So that's how the system works. So because each soy sauce has its own primary raw material and the manufacturing process, the Yin-Yo and the Jiangyo brewer have been divided into 2 groups by both production method and flavor. Yin-Yo brewers emphasize their conventional brewing procedures, and the Jiangyo brewer tend to regard the modern production equipment installed in their factory site as a strong proof of the stable quality. Based on their different production methods, one may perceive an implied distinction, with the former as a traditional and the later as a modern. The binary suggests a distinction that has been emphasized by the 2 different producers. The traditional Yin-Yo brewer has restored Taiwanese brewing wisdom. The modern Jiangyo brewing relies heavily on the rest of a latest brewing machine. To further explain this distinction, I will summarize briefly the background history of soy sauce in Taiwan. Today, it is not difficult to figure out that the fear of chemically processed soy sauce reminds Taiwanese of food safety issue and raised major concerns over brewing technology. Fear of chemical soy sauce and food safety shocked Taiwanese consumers and made them to turn into Yin-Yo products that are free of chemical brewing process. When brewing technology is mentioned in such context, it refers to the traditional and the modern brewing procedures utilized by the types of brewers and the images associated with Yin-Yo and Jiangyo. Due to Taiwan's colonial history, 2 different kinds of soy sauce appears on Taiwan's dining table. Soybean soy sauce was introduced to Taiwan during Japan's colonial administration, simply because the Japanese colonial officer and other Japanese immigrants couldn't bear the flavor of Yin-Yo that was introduced by the Han immigrant from the southern China from the Qing period. Due to Japanese regulation of brewing soy sauce during World War II, the 2 groups of soy sauce brewers finally had opportunity to meet one another and learn different brewing technology. Quite a few continue to brew both kinds of soy sauce in the post-war period. However, after several decades, the 2 sauces have today become symbolic representation of the traditional and the modern. It is noteworthy that brewing technology, or at least its appearance, has become the standard utilized to distinguish the modern from the traditional. In other words, brewing technology not merely defines Taiwan's 2 soy sauce products, but also draws a clear boundary line between the traditional and the modern by emphasizing the brewing method. Meanwhile, black bean soy sauce has been given authenticity and thus closely tied with Taiwan's distinctive tradition through the rediscovering Taiwan process, where Taiwanese distinguish themselves from the inherent Chinese food ways alongside the rise of Taiwan nationalism. Okay, so please the next slide. Okay, the 1970 special issue, as you can see that the 黄豆与制油10周年特刊酱油制造专辑 is published by American Soybean Association, 美国黄豆协会, has recorded the Japanese expert 𝗂沱𝗲旄 𝗂𝘁𝗂𝗱 talk. The talk was given on December 5th, 1973, to the Taiwan's major soy sauce brewers, and Mr. 𝗘𝘁 claimed the emerging necessity to introduce the modern brewing method. His talk firstly began to praise the superior and stable supply of American soybeans, as well as the American wheat that is beneficial to soy sauce brewing industry. Also, according to Japan's mass production experience, environmental sanitation and automatic production is crucial to Taiwan's major food factory in the near future. 𝗘𝘁 continued, applying new technology will increase the annual yield of soybean sauce yield, and it's capable to satisfy the increasing demand of the Taiwanese. So his talk reads, the 20% lipid content of soybean has nothing to do with the fermentation, and we should not use the whole bean for production. So in Taiwan, the standard process is that you use that for salad oil, and then use the rest of it to brew soy sauce. So to the Taiwanese government, it's actually an economical way to produce soybean soy sauce in a sense. The most economic way is to take advantage of skin peeled and deflated soybean, because the texture of beans is not suitable for fermentation. Black beans used in production should be avoided. Plus, the fragrance of black bean soy sauce is not as good as soybean soy sauce. I don't know if any of you will agree with this, but for many Taiwanese, it's not acceptable. So its production is fine if we can keep it as a local flavor, according to Mr. 𝗘𝘁. One may clearly understand Mr. 𝗘𝘁's stance toward yin from his talk. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just simply try to show you lecture introduce different kinds of latest model of brewing machine recently used in Japan in 1980s. So kind of like half of the special issue is like this. Then it followed, modern soy sauce factory are equipped with brewing machine of latest model and of great efficiency, which middle and small factory could never imagine. Based on the record, we may draw a brief picture of how the US dominant soybean export has been gradually changed our dining table in Cold War period, simply by supporting major food industry to take over the market share of black bean soy sauce. To conclude, not only the Japanese brewing technology, as well as its modern equipment help to renew Taiwan's soy sauce brewing, but the US food regime and the US 408 civil law that allows Taiwan could use its domestic dollar to purchase US agricultural products. All of this play an essential role in this change. Okay, so I will move to my conclusion, very short conclusion. In this presentation, I used two objects, red coral necklace and the soy sauce in Taiwan, to illustrate how Cold War, along with other factors, have changed the way the tourists think about Taiwan and the Taiwanese taste it. From both cases, one may see different actors come into play, and they brought significant change. Okay, I think I will end here. And if you have a question and want to know more details, then we can talk about it later. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so I will invite all three speakers from the afternoon session to come front, and we can start our Q&A time. So, Thank you for giving us such a great presentation. While the floor prepares their questions, I will use my privilege as moderator and ask my first question to all three of the speakers today. So my question is actually about scales and localities of each story. In terms of human, like for example, Dr. Hyun discusses this like trans-Asian network within the US superpower. Juyoung talks about Taiwan's researcher trained in Japan and US and all the shrimp farmers. And also Dr. Hyun talks about the Japanese and PRC tourists and also Taiwan's like soybean consumers and also government. But if we think about non-humans, it's not bounded by like all these localities of humans we discussed about like the nation, like where they learn, where they reside. But when we think about non-humans, it's like skies and sometimes in laboratory. Shrimp, it's some ocean and many times in ocean farms, like seaside farms. Carol in underwater and different kinds of beans in their fermentation containers. So it's grand transnational stories, but at the same time, it becomes as small as a particular shrimp tasting sense of these individuals. So I would like to know more about what is your approach in managing like this macro and also micro relationships and discussing very particularly situated life and materials, but within this larger Cold War. So it's general like methodological questions, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you for the great question, and it's really, I think that it's not easy to answer, but I think that I have to just comment that my work is originally from the new historiography of science diplomacy rather than the material history that we are discussing today. So there should be some limitations that I can answer to your questions. But in terms of some skills, how can I say, the maps, the project that I'm looking at right now, in fact, has been quite frequently studied by several scholars, particularly by some anthropologists who are interested in birds in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, and also some historians of ornithology based in America. But they mostly focused on the McClure and his name and his some official reports. And I thought that it's an international project, it's a translation project, but we need to look at some detail, what's happened in some local context. And so I also had to use some kind of the national boundaries like South Korea and Japan, and I feel really bad. I wanted to be just escape from that kind of the confinement, but but at the same time, I think that by looking at the interaction, much more local interaction between Japanese and South Korean ornithologists, I think that I can just decentralize the previous established scholarship on the maps as a Cold War, US-led Cold War science project. So I don't know if it can answer your question. Very difficult question.
Comprehensive. Originally, I'm an economy sociologist, so I originally see that's a local phenomenon. That's the local network, local production, because everybody, most people in Taiwan, when he sold off the aquaculture, they often see that's a very local thing. And so that's my original assumption. So that's kind of a later discovery. And of course, one part to try to fit in the discussion today is that how its origin is that it has some, I really don't have any clear methodology, but I realized that that's not a movement only occurring in Taiwan, because I think there are many parts I didn't deal with. But like, at that time, for example, there are still many US-sponsored research institutes, like in Philippines and many places. And one thing important for Taiwan in both, I do believe, not only in the colonial context, but in the Cold War context, that it often seen as a place where you can develop something toward the south. So why they have this in Donggang? Actually, it is a quite prosperous fish town, but not the place where you can think of try to put the newest research there. And I guess the reason is that because that's a southern part of Taiwan, so they believe they kind of can expand those this skill to this technology to more southern. So actually, at the same time, US also sponsor a research institute for the fishery in the Philippines. They kind of send out competition. But actually, I'm not expert on that. Just what I find, I guess that's where we maybe future discussion. That's one part of the how the technology change. So if you ask me the Cold War or the colonial period, I think in Taiwan, especially the role is the south. So people, and we know that when we talk development, it's always the north-south. If you look at the development project in the Cold War, it's also similar how to give the southern people more protein, and that's why they have such investment. Why they research into. Actually, many of them in the southern Taiwan, which was not far from the center of academic at that time. Like also another example, I didn't really study, but I know the history is the hog farm, the pig industry, and they also put it in southern Taiwan. So maybe they have this kind of project, but how this project goes, that's I think very interesting to see how those Taiwan was kind of in between the south and north. In fact, it's difficult to say Taiwan is Northeast Asia or Southeast Asia, and I think that means something in the Cold War context or earlier. The other thing is also kind of this tension. I'm sorry, I also didn't study, but I kind of recently found is that the species, the way species kind of, because in the past, in the literature, like anthropology of aquaculture, especially focused on Norway, and we often see species as very stable one. I think in SDS, everybody read the article about the scallop in the France. So you think about it's kind of relatively stable single species, but not included in this presentation, but actually the species has changed almost every 5 years in Taiwan. So the quality they found, they kind of much more not a stable, but species, how do they try to use their network or other things to, especially from the tropical area. And also then from an expert of the fishery science, and he say that there's very different ecology between the tropical or the northern area, how to fish the species and the relationship. So I think maybe also that's another, I think maybe in the future we can look at that in the, especially in the Cold War context, how they deal with this kind of the weather, or even we often think that's a nature, so we don't look at them. I think that's kind of important in terms of how they build their project, how do they understand the geographical difference. So that's some of my quick thoughts.
Oh, this is definitely a difficult question to me. I will pay a lot for try to find a solution. But to me, I mean, in my study of soy sauce, I think it's very regional, national, societal, individual, personal, and when we talk about flavors, it's sensational. So it's human body. So I try to take care of like each aspect, but it seems to be very difficult. But when we go into details, people say that's your own experience. Then it's kind of difficult to argue in a very organized way. That's how I feel. But so I don't have any solution. Just share my how do I say, my difficulty to dealing with these issues. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think like Anthropocene itself is very, we're talking in a global like art sense, but like the cases we bring in are very local and small. So I thought it would bring some kind of like discussion on like how to approach this locality and make it into the stories about Anthropocene. Thank you very much. I'll take questions from the floor. Yes.
Here in the script. So thank you very much. It's all very, good session. So I'm really grateful for being here. So actually, I always think about what's the connection between the morning section and this session. And one of the things I say, like in this morning, we say a lot of bad things, like disasters, events, pollutions, a lot of things, which shows like the downside of why we need Anthropocene studies. But in this session, we have the generative side of this, because people make profit, make business, make industry from it. So let me think about the two sides of Cold War science. That one, on the one hand, is very ideological, say like we're driven by some old colonial legacies among others. But on the other hand, this is sort of capitalist agenda. So like we make money, it's a developmental agenda, want to make profit, we make development of it. So I have a general question maybe for three of you say, especially for Cheng and Li-Hsuan, is that it seems to me like what you just said about your stories made me think about the old term we often use the South, global South means extractivism. That means say like removal from the natural resource and the remaining processing, you get money from it. Basically, you just exploit the natural resource like forests or other things. And it seems to me say like your stories just make me think about that. For example, like the Li-Hsuan story, I would wonder say like before the fish pond, what it used to be? There used to be a rice paddy or other things. So apparently they are replaced by something more probable. And also related to Jaehwan's stories that you compare two kinds of things. Like one thing is very essential technology because soy sources, like a lot of people, Chinese people need it. It's very essential everyday technology. But the one of Red Carroll is very, ideological, right? You got a lot of kings and queens. This is fitting some the imaginaries about like. So apparently there are different kind of product, but they aim on the same thing. That is a sort of development. So let me simply think about like what do we say whether like extractivism or say like kind of developmental agenda is still valid if you take care of Anthropocene studies and also back to the Jaehwan story about the like bird watching. I'm thinking about because Li-Hsuan already say like some of natural resources actually is moving, just like mullet, the wu-yu, wu-yu actually fishing it from here to there, and actually when they pass by the territory, people try to catch it, right? It's a kind of moving resource. That is also the one in the herbal study. So I'm curious about like whether if we go back to the Cold War context, whether the kind of developmental agenda or say like what the developmental strategy is still valid. Even we would take the scope, the new scope of Anthropocene studies. Thank you.
Thank you for the great question. Just in relation to the Anthropocene and historically, I think that my case indicates a kind of the development of the role of science as monitoring of the Anthropocene and the bird watching, the transnational bird watching project flourished during that time with the development of the global environmentalism. And in fact, many of ornithologists who participated in the NAPS project later became the national conservationists and global environmentalists, and they developed some worldwide monitoring system. And I think that part of some activities carried out by Korean ornithologists and international ornithologists, the DMZ also quite originated from this project in some sense. So historically, this project, the Cold War project, is related to the production of the global nature, and bird was a part of it, and also the production of the some kind of the environmental science for Anthropocene. And also, it's a bit related to or not, but in the 60s and 70s, I think that historians have to, particularly who are interested in the Anthropocene or Anthropocene studies, have to pay more attention because there were, maybe some of you already know that there was already some kind of interdisciplinary effort that we are doing with the Anthropocene studies at the time, and it's called the human ecology. So in the 60s and 70s, particularly after 1972, the Stockholm event was some social scientists and ecologists began to think that they can do, they have to collaborate to solve the issues of the pollution and some global environmental crisis. And it was the first attempt to just tackle the global issue by interdisciplinary collaboration, but it went failure. And I think that more historians of science and as scholars have to look at that history to understand or to develop a better future for our Anthropocene studies. Thank you.
First, yeah, I think if you look at environment, that's, I didn't emphasize this part, but there's not a real story because we, some of you may know, the coastal village actually had a very severe problem of sinking the land kind of sinking, and if you visit there, it's very kind of, I would not say funny, but kind of because the sea is actually much higher than the land. So that's a big price because everybody can kind of extract the underground water. So actually, I think not only like you look at the sea, but also they have really, really big influence. And actually, nobody knows how to solve this problem. And nobody nowadays knows even you cannot stop the aquaculture because the whole energy is relying on that. The whole region. And if anyone tries to do that, definitely lose the election, and that's the story. So no, if everyone tries to regulate this thing, and they must do the very, very careful. Otherwise, they soon be thrown out from the local government. And so that's another story. Another part is not a very good story is that because in the system, people kind of use very intense. They have very intensive, and it's an environment which kind of generate a lot of disease. Officially, and that's also become always unstoppable. And if you ask them, some then say, okay, that's the environment because we put too many, but they still do that. And sometimes by strong medicine, sometimes they just if they cannot come. Actually, the shrimp industry after it's big, it can disappear because due to the virus, the eruption virus. But because they very soon find new species to put in your system. So, and not by the government or anything, but by the, So I think there indeed some, and not a very huge environmental cost, and I do believe it's not foreseen by, even by, which I think, he said he actually didn't think that will become that way. And the disease is kind of the problem of the global aquaculture sector. So that's the aquatic sector. So that's the common problem. So actually they did have, if you look at environment, I think there's a cost there. But also, I think the core is multi-dimensional. So I think in this story, of course, one part story is that we have a core, and probably is how to combine, is the different combination of Japanese and American. I think both in all of our story we have this element. But the other element I think in Korea and Taiwan, and it's very important, is the land reform. And for them now today, more discussion of that. But land reform has become a small farmer system and a lot of, and of course we know the original intention is trying to prevent the rise of Communist Party. So not only in the land reform, but in every communist system, they kind of a lot of way to quite restrain become corporation or try to protect the small farmers in some way. They all find the same system. So it's kind of a complicated combination of the element of Cold War. That's what I actually say. So I don't think that's one single story. We can see those elements that try to prevent communist parties. I think it's a central intention of Cold War, and also the idea of development now has more criticism, but maybe probably 1960, 50, I don't know. But how many people have that kind of, I don't know, because I'm not a historian, but there's development and there's political element and also some regional variance, because we know Japan's role in the East Asian Cold War system, but probably not in many other places. And of course, that's colonial legacy. So I would say, like, go back to this kind of assemblage. I'm not expert of that too, but kind of I think how different elements actually come together at such a place at a time produce an outcome. So that's my take of this.
Yeah, good questions. And I'd like to divide it into two parts. One is in the case of soy sauce, both I'm talking about is from soy sauce, but yeah, it's Taiwan's soy sauce. They use like local grains, like local grown black beans, and emphasize it's like non-chemical or like local farmer growing it. And they even have something like tangerine soy sauce using, like, how do I say, overly grown tangerines to make soy sauce. The flavor is close to 𝗖𝗂𝗷𝗲𝗰𝗁𝗀, Japanese. So try to have different role to, yeah, it's difficult to blend together. But then let's move to the second case. I'd like to say, 𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗷𝗲𝗰, the world's biggest soy sauce manufacturer, they can promote their new type of shoyu. It's called the 𝗘𝘁𝗁𝗀, living soy sauce. The gene still like keep growing, help growing the soy sauce. So in the past, we don't really talk about, we want our shoyu to be not being polluted. So we try to kill every microbes, every genus before they sold to the public, sold to the consumers. But right now, they still, they kind of change of their mind. They are thinking of a good environment to keep the soy sauce keep fermenting and in a good flavor without adding too much preservatives. So that's interesting case I'm looking at. So I think in both cases we see that how they try to bring the new idea to brew soy sauce. So that's basically what I want to say.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Yes.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and in some way very diverse topics, and then you nicely put the stories together under the Cold War issues. And so I've been thinking about what does Cold War mean in this context, or you just put the Cold War to have something in common, or whether the Cold War plays a really big role in your narrative. If Cold War is just a time period after 1945, you may describe it in a different way. Other than that, I think there may be two ways to tackle. One is the Cold War is not one-sided; it's two-sided, right? Like United States and Soviet, right? And communism and capitalism, and South Korea and North Korea. And then there is always opposing values and ideologies and things. Whenever you do something and then you have something alternative, and then how does that affect you or not? And then that's a big issues to consider. And that's one way of engaging Cold War issues in the story. And the other is actually it's in history there is a big debates over periodization and continuity and discontinuity. And if you put the Cold War up front, then the basic assumption is that there is a discontinuity, right? Then you have to characterize and articulate what is the discontinuity, and then what is the benefits of emphasizing that discontinuity. Otherwise, it can confuse. And then I confused for some reasons, and one is, for example, soy sauce. And then it's Korea and then Japan and Taiwan has a sort of a traditional way of making soy sauce, and then during the Cold War period, and then there is other technologies available, and then there is competitions. But we may be able to emphasize sort of a traditional side, right? And then I'm thinking of probably that Victoria Lee's book on the microbiology, and then the long tradition of the Japanese living with the microorganism, and the soy sauce, and then sake, and other big industry, and how they sort of sustain sort of research tradition into the Cold War. And then it's different stories, but there is an emphasis on continuity. And then I see something like that in your story, that how it goes into that. And ornithology, actually, Jaehwan emphasizes some kind of new things, but the Japanese colonial government also emphasized the study of birds. And if you go to the Korea's National Science Museum in Daejeon, and there is a big collection of birds, which was collected during the Japanese colonial period. And then they were interested in birds for some reasons. And then there is a number of accounts. And so it's not just all of a sudden the U.S. Sort of studying that kind of projects, and then well, this is environmental and all interesting new phenomenon. But there is some something going on. I don't know about the shrimp industry and other things, but there may be something going on in continuity. But I might be wrong, and then if you want to emphasize the Cold War aspects, and then there may be a way of saying something.
So, thank you, Professor Bob, for the great question. And just for my case, it hard to say Cold War if we look at the collaboration team, because all collaborators were just under the bamboo curtain, and the U.S. military presence in Asia was really important. So all the participant countries of the maps impact where the U.S. military base was located. It included Taiwan and Japan and South Korea, as well as Malaysia. Those four countries were strongly influenced by U.S. military presence on the one hand, and the U.S. technical aid on the other hand. And also, I have to say that the collaboration between the Japanese and South Korean ornithologists were only enabled within the umbrella of this U.S. military-led international project, particularly before 1965. So it's quite different from the Taiwanese context, because due to the really strong anti-Japanese sentiment before 1965, when Japan and South Korea made the diplomatic normalization. The scientists had a quite difficulty in the interaction, between each other. We the Japanese scientists officially, because it could be considered kind of the pro-Japanese collaborating motif, and it's a really quite politically risky in the anti-Japanese sentiment strong on the Korean context, particularly before 1965. So in fact, that is one of the difficulties that Korean historians are looking at the interaction between the Japanese and Korean scholars after the World War II, before the 1965, because the Korean scholars try to hide what they did with the Japanese scholars. So if you wanted to the materials, then you have to look at the Japanese materials or the American materials. Then you can find that kind of the informal collaboration between the Japanese and Korean scholars. And related to the continuity of the colonial stories, yes, first of all, I have to say that recently, including myself and more Asian scholars try to decentralize the typical idea of a Cold War as a discontinuity. And they just, they wanted to, including myself, wanted to decentralize the typical idea of the US-centered technical aid between United States scientists or engineers and Korean or Taiwanese or other Japanese or other the respective people. And the solution was to pay more attention to the inter-Asian exchange. So I used intentionally the word Trans-Asia, and that is a way to just emphasize, or how can I say, just that I try not to lose or ignore the role of the US military or the US technical aid in the development of science and technology in the South Korean context. But at the same time, I wanted to say that the Cold War enabled more collaborations within the Cold War allied countries. Even though, but at the same time, like Japan, some Cold War allied countries had some kind of the colonial past, and that past did not just go away after World War II because the human networks and materials and many things still remain. So we try to show more complicated nature of the Cold War instead of just defining it as discontinuity. And in terms of the ornithological work during the colonial period, so that's also really interesting that maybe you saw a lot of birds specimens in Daejeon National Science Museum in Daejeon and many areas, and many of them are collected by colonial collaborators of Yamashina and Kuruda. And one of the bird scientists was Mori Damejo. In fact, he was a zoologist, so he collected all the animals, including birds. So he was like a decade-long collaborator of Yamashina. So quite a lot of specimens were studied together with Yamashina. So in most cases, he collected some specimens or bought some specimens in some market, Korean market, during the colonial period. And he sent a specimen to Yamashina Institute. Then Yamashina just checked the detail and listed and wrote some paper together. And same thing later happened with Hong-gu-won. He was the father of Byung-won, today's the character. He also just began to be included in that kind of some imperial network made by the Yamashina and Kuroda from the 1930s. And so, and furthermore, maybe I have to add that even though during the colonial period, and as Annika Colors said, there are sort of the Trans-Asian ornithological project, but the nature is quite different because in the 20s and 30s, they collected birds for some natural history purposes, just for the systematics, and they didn't have some conservation agenda, and even they didn't have any idea that they had the idea that migratory birds could deliver some actual parasites, but that kind of things only were enabled to more sophisticatedly investigated after 1960s, and by the presence of the U.S. military laboratories and their some technical aid. Yeah, so I don't know. I answered right on the. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for your comment. I would definitely Victoria these books.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it's
It's probably quite recently.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I will definitely read it after this. Cold War and Cold War ideology. I'd like to cite Yoshimi Shinya, the Japanese media scholar. He and his colleagues kind of like posed a question, say, has the Cold War end? So this is kind of like a influential question to many scholars in cultural studies. And I think kind of I was kind of think of in that way, like how Cold War ideology continues and be absorbed in our body or in our thoughts, and how we react to it. So how we interact with this object. So I think soy sauce is the good example for because we use it daily, but we didn't pay attention how it changed. Like most of the Taiwanese, they are not aware what kind of soy sauce the vendors or the restaurant used for them now. And they claim that they know because of this specific fragrance, but in the reality they don't, they just eat. So that's something I will use it as a kind of a metaphor to say like a Cold War exists, and kind of like its influences continues to us only if we pay enough attention. Otherwise, like just like the U.S. dominance in Europe, or so-called U.S. imperialism, like functions behind. So if we don't pay enough attention, we wouldn't kind of like catch it. So that's my. I don't know if I answered what you're trying to ask, but yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, so it's a difficult question, and like you mentioned, I also read from some Japanese historians. They will say the post-war, because some of them will say post-war right in the last 3 decades, and that's kind of certain region, and some will say that after 90 they go post-war, and probably the first post-war means Cold War in a sense. Yeah, I think there's many. I think there's many several layers. Some layer, like especially politically, trying to replace the left wing, and I think that's very like especially in the early 1950s as a important part, and so my view of Cold War is much more like a context. I would see it's maybe an element, not necessarily internally coherent, but they are there, and there are some different historical or social context. We have different kind of assembling them, or kind of combining them. So that's what my take on Cold War. And of course, there are some very important political implications that is trying to reject communism. So then reform in the under white terror, there are other things is there, and also like under this large kind of goal or like the whole idea of development, actually initially I believe is trying to also prevent the communists, right? So the USA agencies called like among security, I remember is that kind of they put all the development projects to look at the security issue. So there is a lot. So so my question would be, okay, so what thing is that Cold War trying to replace, the structure trying to replace? And we know the left-wing power, or what's others. I'm just curious because I don't really know. I think if we not only look at what Cold War is, and what the Cold War system excludes, then maybe very fruitful to look at what's the Cold War context. And also because I'm not a historian, from my knowledge, the idea of Cold War or USA in Taiwan is a very interesting discussion because during a certain period, our historical education history, we know colonial context, we also don't have Cold War context. Everything is done by the 𝗘𝗀𝗷𝗲𝗰. That's the textbook I read. So maybe the attitude is much more like, oh, this is built by Japanese. Oh, that's funded by the American. There's many people will feel kind of enlightened to find that another kind of anti-colonial, anti-Cold War like some people will have this kind of attitude, probably because our education system try to kind of say everything from that. Because like many USA projects, they will say it's lead by the great government, great leader. And some historians say, no, that's funded and built by Americans. So that's look at subtle context in how people look at this thing. And I don't have any formal investigation, but my guess is many people will, nowadays in Taiwan, will see those things not very negative or even some like enlightened way. And see, okay, so maybe next stage we can have more reflection on why the public memory, some of them are actually excluded by the formal education or things like it's kind of, not until recently that some of them begin to kind of emerge. For example, I just gave maybe related example. That's something I'm in a symposium talking about the anthropology study in the Japanese colonial period. And this audience, he has, those Japanese scholars are so great. Because the reason he said that is that because in post-war, we are not encouraged to study anything about Taiwan. We know that those Japanese scholars, they have some like the imperial gaze we have about Syria, fully agree with that. But that old man just told some things like that. Okay, we are not allowed to study Taiwan, but how these Japanese scholars pay so much attention to our hopes. That's so great. Yeah, even though I do believe many Taiwanese will have that, that's because if you look at the historical consciousness, is that we have certain period, everything about Taiwan is kind of excluded or related. So I guess how people look at that will be, I think will be very different from Korea, which has this vivid memory of things kind of be replaced by the whole world. And I would not say Taiwan have the same, we have the fight terrorism thing, but also another much more complex issue, especially contemporary nationalism and things like that. Yeah, so that's my, I don't know whether I answered the question, but that's my quick thought on this.
Maybe I just add a quick note about this new terminology related to the just complicate the current some division of binary of colonial continuity and Cold War discontinuity. So usually the Japanese scholars they use the term transfer history and to try to explain, try to escape from the idea of Shenzhen and Shenzhen. And it's 1945 as a general point. They try to think of connecting to several wars. So, I mean the Pacific War, the Manchurian invasion, and the Second Sino-Japanese War, and Pacific War, and Cold War are connected. So we have to understand there are several wars, and Cold War also has to be understood in that context. And maybe I think that it's quite useful to discuss our topic that we are talking about.
Okay, so the time has up. It was such a wonderful discussion. Thank you all for joining us today. And I would also like to thank our staffs who made all this available. And thanks for the sponsors who made this available as well. Thank you for coming in today.